Alien Fox Girl's heart broke as the galaxy whispered his name. War had been going on for 3 cycles now, and Kiara stood at the observation deck of her clan's flagship watching another human vessel tear through their defensive line like it was made of paper and not the strongest shields her people had ever. Madesh was from the Volner race, and they looked like what humans might call foxes if foxes walked on 2 legs and had hands that could crush steel and eyes that glowed amber in the dark, and fur that shifted colors based on emotion. And right now, her silver fur was streaked with dark blue because that meant fear in her species. Language of humans were supposed to be weak when they first made contact 5 years ago, and every species in the Galactic Council had laughed at them because they came from a death world, sure, but they were small and had no natural weapons in their ships. Looked like they were held together with tape and hope, and their diplomats were awkward and nervous. Kiara remembered the first human she ever met, and his name was Jake Murphy, and he was a maintenance worker on one of the joint stations, and he had smiled at her with those strange flat teeth and offered her something called coffee, and she had accepted because refusing gifts was rude in Volner culture. Coffee had been terrible and bitter and wonderful, and Jake had laughed when she made a face and said he would bring her tea next time, and there had been a next time. And many times after that, Jake had told her about Earth and about oceans that covered most of the planet, mountains that touched the sky, and cities with billions of people, and music that made you want to dance, and food from 1,000 different cultures and stories that had been told for thousands of years. Told her about his grandmother who raised him, and about his sister who was studying to be a doctor, and about his friends who he missed, and about how he was saving money to buy a little house by a lake somewhere quiet. Kiara had told him about her clan, and about the hunting grounds of her home world, and about the 3 moons that rose at different times and created different tides of magic in the air, and about her brother who died in a stupid accident, and about how she joined the military to make him proud. And Jake had listened and understood in a way that most Volner didn't, because her people were always about strength and honor, and Jake just cared about weather. She was okay. That was 2 years before the war started, and Kiara thought about Jake every single day since. 10th war started because of a misunderstanding and a treaty violation that wasn't really a violation, but the council didn't care because they wanted to put the humans in their place and show them that death world species were meant to serve, not to stand equal. Council sent a small fleet to blockade Earth and demand tribute in terms of surrender, and they expected the humans to fold immediately because humanity had 12 ships total, and the Council had sent 50. Humanity did not fold, and instead those 12 ships tore through the Council fleet like hungry predators through prey, and only 7 Council ships made it back, and those ships brought stories of human tactics that made no sense. Humans didn't care about honor in battle, and they used weapons that were considered barbaric, like kinetic missiles that were just chunks of metal moving really fast, and nuclear devices that poisoned space, and cyber attacks that turned your own systems against you. Humans fought like every battle was their last, and like losing meant extinction, and maybe for them, the Council sent more ships, and humanity built more ships, and somehow the humans were building faster and fighting smarter and winning more than they lost. Kiara's clan was pulled into the war 6 months ago, and she had been in 4 major battles and watched 3 of her clutchmates die, and she killed more humans than she could count and hated every second of it. But orders were orders, and honor demanded service, and her commander said the humans were animals that needed to be put down, and she tried to believe that even though she knew it was a lethal human ship that just broke their line, was called the Spirit of Texas, and Kiara watched it spin and dodge and fire with a precision that seemed impossible for something that big and that fast. Their tactical officer was shouting numbers and probabilities, and none of them were good, and her captain ordered all ships to focus fire on the human vessel, and maybe that would have worked except 3 more human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel right behind their formation. Battle turned into chaos, and Kiara was coordinating point defense systems and trying to keep missiles from turning her ship into debris, and all around her people were dying. A human boarding pod latched onto their hull, and Kiara grabbed her plasma rifle and ran toward the breach point with her squad, because that was her job and she was good at. If humans came through the breach fast and hard, and they were wearing armor that made them look like metal demons, and they moved like they had trained for this exact scenario 1,000 times, Kiara's squad fired, and the humans fired back, and 2 of her people went down immediately, and she dove behind cover and returned fire and tagged 1 human in the shoulder, but their armor absorbed. Most of our fight moved through the corridors, and Kiara was separated from her squad, and she found herself in a cargo bay facing a single human soldier, and they both had their weapons. The human was bigger than her and broader, and their helmet display showed a name tag that read Murphy J. Ciara. Felt her heart stop and her fur flashed white, which meant shock, and she lowered her weapon slightly and said Jake's name. Like a Questionante, human tilted their head and reached up slowly and unsealed their helmet and pulled it off, and it was Jake, and he looked older and tired, and Sajic stared at her, and his weapon stayed up, but his hands were shaking, and he said her name quiet like a prayer, and asked what she was doing. Harakiara, said she, was military, and this was her ship, and what was he doing here? And Jake said he enlisted after the war started because the council was bombing human colonies and killing civilians. They stood there for a long moment, and Kiara could hear fighting in the distance, and alarms blaring, and her training said she should shoot him, but her heart said she absolutely could not. Jake lowered his weapon first and said he didn't want to fight her, and Kiara lowered hers and said she didn't want to fight him. Ethithi talked fast and desperate, and Jake said the humans didn't want this war, but they would finish it because Earth would not bow, and Kiara said her people were bound by honor, but this war felt wrong. Jake asked if she remembered the coffee, and Kiara laughed, and it sounded broken, and said she still hated it, and Jake smiled, and it was the saddest thing she had ever seen. Footsteps echoed nearby, and they both knew their time was up, and Jake put his helmet back on and told her to stay safe, and Kiara said the same, and they went different directions. Battle ended with the human ships drawing, but not before they crippled half the Vulner fleet in Kiara's. The captain was furious and talking about revenge and honor. Kiara went to her quarters and cried for the first time since she was a child, because she knew this war would not end until one side was destroyed, and she could not bear the thought of Jake dying. Weeks passed, and more battles happened, and Kiara started noticing things she had ignored before, like how her commanders talked about humans like they were vermin, and how the council propaganda painted Earth as a plague that needed cleansing. She started wondering if maybe her side was wrong, and that thought was dangerous and treasonous, but it wouldn't leave her alone during a supply run to a neutral station. Kiara slipped away from her unit and found a communication terminal and sent a message to Jake's old account, not knowing if it would reach him. She said she was sorry, and she missed their talks, and she wished things were different, and she hoped he was alive. 3 days later, she got a response, and it was just 2 words, but they meant everything, and Jake had written, "Stay aliveth." War escalated, and humanity unveiled new weapons and new ships. They started winning more decisively, and the council was panicking because this wasn't supposed to happen. Rumors spread that Earth had formed alliances with other species who were tired of council control, and that human fleets were liberating occupied worlds, and that the council's grip on the galaxy was slipping. Kiara's clan was reassigned to defend a major shipyard, and intelligence said a large human fleet was coming, and everyone knew this would be a critical battle. Humans arrived with 30 ships, and they were coordinated and relentless, and the Vulner defenders fought hard, but it wasn't. Kiara's ship was hit by a railgun round that tore through their engine section, and they lost power, and life support started failing, and the captain ordered evacuation. Kira made it to an escape pod with 4 others, and they launched just before their ship exploded, and the pod tumbled through space between the battle. Lanisa human frigate caught them in a tractor beam and pulled them in, and Kiara expected execution or imprisonment, but instead they were met by human marines who checked them for weapons, and injurious humans were professional and calm, and they separated the prisoners, and Kiara was taken to a small room with a table and 2 chairs and told to wait. Jake walked in, and Kiara felt her breath catch because he was alive and real and here, and he looked at her like she was the only thing in the university weren't supposed to touch, and there were cameras watching, but Jake crossed the room anyway and pulled her into a hug, and Kiara buried her face in his shoulder and held on